The next issue we are canvassing for you has to do with the fact that Parliament has been held hostage, according to the majority members, by the minority because they say Jachikwe Singh is being persecuted. And because of that, they are going to exercise their right when they want to be in the House and when they don't want to be in the House. So a parliament of 275 members, they need a quorum, the ordinary quorum, to do business. 92 of them. They can't get that number. So what is happening? Are the MPs representing you, or they are representing who exactly? Joining us is the Honorable Joseph Osei-Usu, who is the First Deputy Speaker of Parliament. Thank you so very much for making time to join us on Newsfile, sir.
Thank you too for having me.
Great. And because of the development, you say this is the worst parliament that this country is witnessing now. How so?
Well, I think the headlines often distort the statement. I said when it comes to legislation, lawmaking,
okay,
this parliament has been the worst. Anybody who cares to know can count how many laws have been passed in the last 2.5 to nearly 3 years. Almost 3/4 of the lifespan of Parliament. And it is because probably being so close has brought the worst in us as members of Parliament. I'm not talking about one side or the other. The worst part of us as members of Parliament. I was in the 5th, 6th, and 7th Parliament. In each case, there was some significant difference. But I do know that any party in government would always have challenges because some of your members are ministers, committee chairs. They often have to do some parliamentary business outside of Parliament. But it has always been the practice that once the leaders agree that this business will be done, the backbench does not come in and ruffle the feathers or raise quorum. Those are the things I'm talking about. The kind of cooperation and negotiated arrangements by which Parliament were able to deliver its mandate appears to be missing in this Parliament. And unfortunately, as a result of that, they'll be able to do very little in terms of legislation.
You certainly are very disappointed in the recent developments by the minority to decide that the way to protest what they deem persecution of Jachikwe Singh. In fact, they've added the minority leader as well, who is also standing trial, that any day the courts are going to hear their matters, they will be there. And now we know that Jachikwe Singh's matter will be heard every day. So it means every day they won't come to Parliament. And we discover that initially they were going. So even without the requisite quorate numbers, you were able to do business because by the procedure, until anybody raises the issue, you can continue. Now they have tactically decided that a couple of their members will come into the House just to raise the fact that there's no quorum. So you are not going to have to be able to do any work. This will affect government.
My disappointment is not in any one side. My disappointment is in the members of Parliament. Assuming, just for the purposes of argument, that the minority decides not to come to Parliament for the rest of the year. The majority has sufficient numbers to do business in the House. So I will not blame the minority for any failure to do business. that if there's a failure to do business, it is because members of parliament, and I'm not divided into minority and majority.
Okay.
We need 92 members to be present, and we need 138 members, 92 for ordinary business, 132 members, 138 members to take a decision. In each case, the majority has to do that. So you cannot blame the minority for not coming when you cannot mobilize your own members to be present to have business. I sometimes, unfortunately, as I said, the headline people add what you haven't said to suit their own purpose. But I've never blamed the minority.
Okay.
If there is a failure, it is a failure of members of parliament, including members on the majority. Our responsibility, first and foremost, is to be true to our oath.
All right.
I do know sometimes that mischief frustrates and deliberate mischief do frustrate the work of business. I know, for example, that on last Wednesday, about 4 committees were sitting. The public account was sitting. The subsidiary legislation was sitting. And I think another one, energy or one of others. So there was sufficient number of MPs in the precincts of Parliament. But because we are divided into different activities, all parliamentary business, there were not sufficient numbers in the chamber to be able to perform the duties. Now that has been my dilemma. And I ask the leaders to think about it. If you look through the votes and proceedings, you will see members present, 201. Then in the same votes and proceedings, you see quorum. Because there was not sufficient members in Parliament, the Speaker has to bring proceedings to a close. The same document. One says 201 of you are present in Parliament, and then one says that you couldn't have 92 of you to be present. So that's the dilemma. And I'm saying that in the past, we have gone around this by, let's say that, an arrangement between leaders. Once the leaders of the sides agree that this business, we must do it completed, the backbench doesn't come in to raise quorum. Indeed, even if we did, and I used to try to do that often, my leaders would tell me, no, stop, we have agreed to do this. Indeed, some of our senior members had complained with the freshmen that the minority leader, the now majority leader, is too compromising. We should not be allowing that. But then he called us and said, listen, government business must go on. We must state our position, state our alternatives to the Ghanaian people. But those who have been given the mandate must be allowed to work.
Okay.
That is what was ingrained in my mind and still is ingrained in my mind today.
Kindly hold on for me. I'm coming to you back to you briefly to tell us from where you stand, and more particularly because of your hallowed office of the First Deputy Speaker, what is the solution? Because Joe Jachikwesin will go to court every day. Ato Forsen will also be going to court, and the minority have not changed their position. They are rather seeking to improve their tactics in the way they have to function. So how will you ensure that government business does not suffer in this regard? And when I say government business, we're talking about business for the state, not for so-called MPP forming a government. We are affected. So, Sam George, how is this justified? I note that, for example, in 2016, there was a postponement of debate of the budget, not once, twice, because of the questions of quorum. This has happened over and again. Each speaker has had to complain. I'm on the Parliament's website, on the 20th of November 2019, Parliament suspends sitting for lack of quorum. Right Honourable Okwe, Tuesday morning, suspended parliamentary sitting for more than 1 hour as the House failed to form a quorum. How do you explain this to the people who have voted you to go there and work for the state?
Something I think that it's important that I recognize the clarity that has been brought to the reportage in this interview by the Right Honourable the Honourable First Deputy Speaker. And it's important that is clarified, because the way the reportage came, I had questions about it. In fact, before we even came on air, I told you what my reservations were, but he's spot on. You cannot blame the minority as the majority chief whip, Another Umpire, is doing. You can hold us responsible for the failure of Parliament to conduct business. We at caucus, we have taken a decision that says that so long as you persecute our members, we would take this position. Don't forget that we've had members of this caucus in court, and we've conducted government business. When Mahama Yariga was being prosecuted by the then special prosecutor, Martin Amidu, we proceeded to continue government business, but Mr. Speaker Mr. Speaker makes the point about, and forgive me because in Parliament, whether it's the deputy or first or second, we refer to him as Mr. Speaker. But in this case, Honourable Joseph also makes the point that leadership takes decisions, and those decisions are challenged by the backbench. I think that the problem has largely been one that, on our side, we don't trust the majority. They have not been men of their words, especially when it comes to decisions that were taken by leadership. And I may not want to go into all of the details, but he would be privileged to some of the conversations around the prosecution, especially of Honourable Atufosin, and conversations and decisions that were taken by leadership relative to the passing of Godfrey Dame. I'll leave it at that. And the current position from the government. So if leadership has gone in to have certain conversations, and one side has carried out its side of the bargain, and then the other side begins to flip-flop, and then leadership comes back again to say, oh, we want to have a conversation to pass this bill, the backbench will not accept it. And leadership themselves are now compliant with the backbench to say that, look, we cannot trust the word of the other side because they will always flip-flop.
What are you talking about? There was an agreement that the Attorney General will not prosecute.
I said I won't go into the details of it.
Prosecution is a political decision. And
Absolutely.
The office of the Attorney General is a political office.
Yes.
Because he's not only the Attorney General, but he's also a Minister
for Justice, yes.
So what are you telling us? You are coding something.
I'm saying that the problem in Parliament today, in this 8th Parliament, is simply the inability of the MPP side to stick to whatever bargains that have been made over and over again. And if you remember, the former minority leader, Haruna Idrisu, has had course on the floor of the House to tell Chairman Sambonsu, majority leader, that this is not what we agreed to. This is not what we discussed in conclave, because Che will come on the floor and change his position. And the same thing is happening now, even with Atu. And so when the backbench takes the position and says that, look, we will not cooperate with the government side, we've taken that position. Every decision you take comes at a political cost. And I've seen Dr. Rashid's comments about our position and all of that. We are minded by that. But the failure of government to conduct its business is not because of the minority. It's simply because the members of the government side, the majority in Parliament, have decided to put the campaign of Alan Chairman Kennedy Japan and Dr. Mahmoud Baumia above government parliamentary business. They are not able to make the 92 members because their members of Parliament are on the field campaigning for their presidential candidates. And now they are also beginning to look at preparing themselves for their own parliamentary primaries. That is where the crux of the matter is. And so you see, in this situation, the government side would need to realize that you can't use threats, you can't use, like Anodompre is doing, you can't use the approach, Anodompre's approach to this matter of holding press conferences and calling people out will not solve the problem.
I just mentioned to you 2016. You know who was in government?
NDC was in government.
What was the parliament like?
At that time, it was also a similar situation.
No, it wasn't.
It was a similar situation.
You didn't have this kind of parliament.
No, the margins were, the numbers, the gap wasn't that big.
You had the majority.
We had a majority of about 19 seats or not.
Twice the House was suspended, debate was postponed because you couldn't raise the numbers to debate the budget.
Absolutely. I'm not running away from that. That is a matter of history. That happened. What happened? The NDC brought its numbers in. Ministers were asked to come in and come and take part in the debates. The debates proceeded.
So you know that ministers, because at least majority of the ministers must come from parliament according to the constitutional arrangements, ministers have a duty. Some are traveling. You can't take that away from
How
them.
many ministers does the MPP have?
Some are traveling.
How many ministers do they have from
So this is bound to happen.
Even if they had 50 members from parliament, even if they had 50, at least that should give them at least another 50 out of 138. They should have 88. Then they will need only 4 NDC.
Are you not being unreasonable? If Judge Kwesing, and he has a lot of support in the country and elsewhere, that he should not be prosecuted, there's no point in the prosecution. Atufo saying that he's not guilty of anything. Why don't you allow them?
Because Colin Lauder is part of it.
Why don't you allow them to go through the process? And they have very good lawyers. Why don't you allow them to go through the process and assert their innocence?
Because we feel that this is not a prosecution, it's a persecution. You see, the crux of the matter, even with Judge Kwesing, is not even the fact of the prosecution, it's the daily nature of it. And that's our problem. Look, Nam1 is walking free. How long has that prosecution been ongoing? Kwesi Nyantechi. How long has that prosecution been ongoing? So what is the expediency of prosecuting Judge Kwesing on a daily basis? If you let me and my colleagues on the NDC side understand what the existential value of a daily prosecution of Judge Kwesing is, a man who has, look, the man has set history. He's been elected twice in one constituency in the space of 3 years in the same parliament. Let us understand what the value of the daily prosecution is. Then we'll appreciate it. Atufosin had been going to court. We weren't boycotting the situation.
That's right.
The trigger for this is the daily prosecution of Judge Kwesing.
Which is not against law. Which is not against law.
But it's a political decision. And so we are also taking a political decision. The NPP cannot arrogate to itself the powers to determine how the NDC must operate. The NPP cannot say that they can take a political decision and the NDC should not take a political decision. The NDC is not a church. We're a party. We're a political party. We're not a religious organization. And so we take political decisions.
Let me go to Dr. Theo Champong. Oliver Bakavoma says that he wants a daily trial so he can get done with this. He doesn't get it. And to be very sincere with you, it's such a sad situation. His passport was taken away. He needed his passport. It was so difficult to get the passport. The Attorney General kept opposing his passport being released on the account that he will run away. He won't come back to stand trial. Eventually, the court did justice to him, gave him his passport. He traveled. Guess what? He came back to Ghana, the day of his trial. And he came to Ghana only for an adjournment, because nothing happened in the court. Meanwhile, if he hadn't come, there would have been a bench warrant and they would go to Interpol for him to be arrested. He takes a flight all the way from wherever he came from, and sometimes this happens in our court.
Yes.
People spend a lot of money, come from long distances, and nothing happens. I think that has to change. Dr. Theo Champong, do you say that what the minority is doing is justifiable, is sustainable?
They are doing it for their political interest, as much as the MPP is also chasing, let me put it this way, the government is pushing this Judge Kwesing trial on a daily basis, also on political grounds, because like Sami and yourself and several others have cited, there are other cases in this country that perhaps, are even of a much more serious nature that would, warrant a daily trial if needed. But people go, and these cases are, pushed aside, sometimes 3 weeks, sometimes 2 weeks, and things like that. So the point is that there would always be a political reaction to such issues. So I am not surprised that the NDC says that, as long as this daily trial thing goes on, then they would, as a matter of solidarity with Judge Kwesi, not show up in the House. But the problem is not just an NDC problem. We also have MPP members that also don't.
Before you address that aspect of the MPP members, the question is what they are doing. Whose interests are they serving? And we are going to pay them at the end of the month. This is public funds. We are going to pay them. So are they representing their constituents? Are they representing us? Or who are they representing?
They are representing their interests. They're also representing the national interest.
And should that be allowed?
No, but the point is that how do you define that interest? The interest of what happens in Parliament, yes, is a national interest. But then the interest also of showing solidarity and making sure that, what is good for the goose is good for the gander as well. That argument could also be made equally on the part of the NDC, because although legally you could have that daily trial, there's nothing whatsoever that shows that should be the process in terms of precedent. People go to court, cases are adjourned for 2-3 weeks, you name it. So why the rush in this particular instance? So they could also argue that on the basis of national interest and public interest, what they're doing is right. It's neither here nor there. But the big thing for me going forward is that these delays would probably become the norm as we go into the election year, right? Everybody suddenly is getting into campaign mode. We've got parliamentary primaries, we've got presidential primaries that are upcoming latter part of this year, next year, and normally even at the end of the first quarter of the election year, most of the MPs don't even come to the House at all. So of course, parliamentary business is going to stall. 13 key bills, acts, and things that have to be passed, including what we were just discussing a few moments ago, the new Public Officers Conduct Act, which is part of the IMF conditionalities, may be stalled. That is the challenge that we're dealing with. But for me, like I said, I don't think it's necessarily an NDC problem. There are people on the MPP side also that don't turn up, and therefore you don't have the quorum being formed. And it's also, of course, if you've got a hung parliament with almost equal numbers on each side, there's always going to be a lot of backroom horse trading and things like that. So to the extent that one side of the party feels that you're not honoring the deal or the bargains that have been made, they would use whatever trick is at their disposal to stall parliamentary business. And it's, of course, Ghanaians that would, take the heat or the effect of those stalled legislative decisions going forward. But I worry, like I've indicated, that this may become the norm going into next year, and a lot of key bills will be stalled.
Thank you very much, Dr. Theo Champong. I'll now get back to the First Deputy Speaker, Joe Wise. So there must be consensus somehow, because whatever happens, it is the government, the people that suffer because of the lack of work in an important chamber like Parliament. What are you doing in this direction?
Well, before I get there, let me make my point about...
We have just about 2 minutes to close.
Very well. Just about this
all right.
Interference in the judiciary. First, it is my point never to interfere in judiciary matters. But I also want to put on record I'm totally opposed to any mindset that tries to put the political class above the criminal law of the country. That is why I decline to say anything at all regarding constitutional members of parliament or any politician. But the true situation we need is the minority has taken their position. We want you to stop ABCD. If you don't stop, we will not come. Fine. The power to stop that is not in parliament. So I don't know who in parliament has promised anybody anything. I'm not privy to any of those. What parliament can do if it wants business done is to make sure that its members, the majority, its members come to the floor of the House to do the work. If we don't do the work, we can't blame anybody. We are 138, sufficient to do anything that we must do. If we don't do it, we have no business. It lies ill in our mouth to blame anybody else. That's my position.
So going into this week in Parliament, we expect that what transpired will continue to repeat itself. Maybe then you should declare the House suspended until such a time that the cases are over.
Well, it shouldn't be the case. If we want to do the work, we are capable of doing the work. If they may change their position, but we should not stake government work on the minority. Wait until they change their position. Why are we called the majority, even if it is 1%? It means that we have sufficient numbers to do the work of the parliament. No business. I believe strongly in agreeing, but as he's saying, maybe some assurances have been given to them which have not been met. I'm not aware of that. I'm not aware of any agreement, or I've been part of business of the day, which presiding and sit through with the leaders, we agree with A, B, C, D, E.
Okay.
And then when we go into the chamber, things change.
Thank you very much, Joseph Osei, who is the first Deputy Speaker of the Parliament of the Republic of Ghana. Manche Bruce in Takrady says, I think the President must crack the whip with immediate alacrity. The Minister must be made to step aside. My guests have been Mary Ada, Acting Executive Director, Ghana Integrity Initiative. Dr. Theo Echampong is economist and risk analyst, political risk analyst. Kwejo Appiah-Tua is Associate Professor of Law, University of Ghana, Legon. Samuel Nete George, MP, Ningo Pram, Deputy Ranking Member, Communications Committee of Parliament, and Member, Public Accounts Committee of Parliament. As for the Communications Committee, without him, it looks like that committee doesn't exist.
I'm flattered.
I'm serious about that.